and welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Check us out on the web at teamwildfire.com. Team Wildfire came about because, I had a technical idea, something I thought I could build. And then, of course, I realized it's going to take a lot of money to do it. And then we're going to have to raise money and start a real company. And, the whole thing turns into a lot of work. And I have a commiserator with me on the show today, Larry Sukay. Larry is the founder and driving force between Western States Fire. They are also trying to develop some new technology to help with fire mitigation. So, Larry, welcome to the show. And right off the bat, my condolences.
Steve, thank you. I appreciate your words of condolence. I mean, we can commiserate over this whole issue of trying to raise money to bring a technology to the market that is much needed. But boy, I'll tell you what, out there, banging on doors and with a cup asking for somebody to fund your project is not an easy task. It is, I've done a lot of things in my life, a lot of hard things, but raising money is by far the hardest thing. Getting people to invest, to have to be, being able to go out and tell a story, tell a vision, and have them see the vision and believe in the vision, and then write a check and have that money show up in your bank account. There's a lot of work that is involved in that. So
a lot of steps. So what's the idea that you are looking to fund?
So we've developed the next generation of aerial wildland firefighting technology. It's called Skhi-Ex, and it's a system that attaches to a helicopter and drops 50,000 cubic feet of foam per minute for up to 14 minutes. So in a single pass, we could put in 1.5 miles of containment line, a minimum of 1.5 miles, up to 5.5 miles, depending on the coverage level, as compared to 600 feet of a helicopter dropping water. It takes 14 helicopters to equal what one helicopter with our Skhi-Ex technology on can do. It takes 14 helicopters to equal what one will do. So it's pretty significant. And we're dropping an environmentally safe foam. It is safe for humans, animals, aquatic life. And the foam, once it hits the ground and dissipates, it creates a barrier that lasts for up to 5 days before it starts to biodegrade. So, we have the ability to go ahead of a fire, put in large-scale fire breaks. We have the ability to go on a direct attack. Our technology is designed to be a suppressing technology versus a retarding technology. But we can either go put the fire out, or we can on a direct attack or an indirect attack by flanking the fire or going ahead of it and just creating large, fire breaks.
So you're building like this enormous foam generator.
Yeah, it is. It has, 50,000 cubic feet. People, it's hard for people to understand and even to conceive what 50,000 cubic feet of foam looks like when it's being dropped. But when you see it, it's significant, and it's pretty impressive. And so we're in the process right now of doing the design of the full-scale prototype. We built a 1/16 scale version that we did proof of concept testing with, that we were able to drop, lift it with a helicopter, go fly it, and drop foam, and to prove that the concept that the rotor wash would help facilitate the foam getting to the ground. And that was highly successful. And now we're building the full-scale prototype and planning to have that here completed in the next, probably next 30, 45 days. And then we'll get into the production on it. So the unit will be produced here in San Diego County in Carlsbad. And, really excited to get that process started. But again, the limiting factor of making all that happen is raising capital.
Yeah, right. That's my favorite movie of all time was The Right Stuff, and there's a great scene in there when the leader of the space program comes in and he asks all the scientists what makes rockets go up, and they start talking about physics formulas and chemistry and rocket nozzles and this, and he says, the only thing that makes rockets go up, bucks. No Bucks, no Buck Rogers, right? Money
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
rockets go up, and
yeah,
it's
that's the
it's
truth.
true. But yeah, so you said you've done a lot of hard things prior to starting this company, and uh, the specifics of the capital raise. Tell me about some of the things you've done on the way to get you where you are now. What are the experiences that led you to start this?
Well, my background, I have a dual. I've run two parallel careers side by side over the years. I'm a second generation firefighter. I grew up in a fire station, crawling over fire trucks, washing fire trucks as a young kid, going to trainings with my dad and all the other firefighters, and I got into the fire service very early. I mean, I was 15 years old when I entered the fire service as through an Explorer program. I started immediately into some of the special operations. I started training at 15 years old to be on the dive team, body recovery team, or special ops. The dive master became, like a big brother to me, a mentor and guide throughout my life. But I did my first body recovery when I was 17 years old. Officially got into the fire department when I was 18. I wasn't supposed to be even on that dive call. My dad went on the call, and he said, "Listen, if you need to use them, you've got my permission. You can use them." So I made my first recovery when I was 17 years old.
Where was that?
That was in Western Pennsylvania. It was Greensburg, Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, about 35 miles east of Pittsburgh. Greensburg Fire Department was, at that time, was the largest volunteer fire department in the country. We had 6 stations. We had in excess of 430 personnel,
Wow.
and we did in excess of 2,000 runs a year. We did strictly fire and rescue, no EMS. It was it was a very, very busy department, a department that was really on the cutting edge of doing things. We had the very first set of Jaws of Life, the first retail set ever sold.
Wow.
So in the early stages, we were doing a lot of extrication where it wasn't uncommon to do one extrication a week. And sometimes we would drive an hour to get to the incident. Maybe it was a tractor trailer on the Pennsylvania Turnpike or something like that that was over the embankment that the driver was pinned. And I can remember the days before the before the Jaws of Life, where it would take an hour or more to cut somebody out of a car, and you would literally watch them bleed out and die in front of you. So the Jaws of Life just became, it was a paradigm shift in auto extrication. And so, but anyhow, the technology that I'm using was developed in my hometown in Greensburg. It was high expansion foam was invented by the Safety Development Corporation. 𝐸_Jameson was the original inventor of it. It was originally created to fight coal mine fires. And in getting the unit fabricated for use in testing and everything else, he went to our fire chief. He had a large industrial sheet metal shop, and so he did all the fabrication and built the very first foam unit. And quickly saw, and this was Ed Hutchison was the chief, and Hutch was just a character in himself. He was a former Marine in the Pacific Islands, Silver Star recipient, he was the personification of blood, guts, and glory. He was a combination of, I would say, John Wayne, Rambo, and Patton all in one. Dynamic guy. But anyway, he saw the value of that technology and the use in the fire service, and so made a deal to buy the first unit that they produced. They built it, put it on a used Willis Jeep chassis, bought it for $13,000, and back then it was a lot of money. but used it all. That was in probably May. Trained with it all summer long, and then in the fall, used it for the first time on a working fire, which was in a women's clothing store. That the fire started at the height of the shopping hour, about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the fire started in the basement of the building, and it filled the building with smoke immediately through the ventilation systems. Ultimately, 5 people died in that fire, 40 were injured. And for everybody who was on scene, said if it wasn't for the use of the high expansion foam, that building would have been gutted from basement to roof. And so they filled the building up with foam, and then that's what put the fire out, and they were able to, recover the fatalities. That was the first time it ever got used. And but I wrote my high school term paper on that technology then in 1973. That's how far back I go with this technology and being focused on it. And then, when I was 19 years old, I was working on my fire science degree. I was planning to do 2 years of community college and go to the University of Maryland for my fire engineering degree. And I got this opportunity to go to work for Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh. It's the 15th largest hospital in the country, as a fire safety protection specialist. It was supposed to be a summer job. At the end of the summer, they came to me and they said, "We really like what you're doing. We want to hire you full time." And I was like, "Well, I need to go to school." And they said, "Well, if you stay, we'll pay for your education." So lo and behold, I stayed at the hospital for 10 years. At age 24, I was appointed the risk manager. I was the youngest division head ever appointed in the history of the hospital. And during the same time I was building my fire service career, I was teaching all over Western Pennsylvania into West Virginia. I was teaching advanced fire rescue. And then ultimately in 1985, because of the cold weather, I hate being cold. I mean, I hate it with a passion. And I'd come out to I came out to San Diego for a conference, 2 back-to-back conferences, 2 weeks apart. And ended up falling in love with San Diego, and within 6 months I was out here. I came out to start up and head up the risk management division for an international company. Got involved in the fire service again. I was with the San Marcos Fire Protection District, paid firefighter there, and spent 5 years with San Marcos, and then went on to Elf and Forest Harmony Grove Fire Department. And then ultimately became the deputy chief of operations there for that department. But at the same time doing consulting work for Fortune 1000 organizations. So went on to do corporate turnarounds, and then ultimately had some health issues, got into the retail side of commercial insurance. And so that's where my day job is right now while I'm building this company. But my fire service career, continued. I, put together the first swiftwater rescue program here in San Diego County. And then I was the branch director on the 1996 Harmony Fire, which we lost 8,600 acres, 144 homes, and 1 fatality in a 16-hour time period. So it was a real firefight. That one. So, but that's kind of my background.
Okay. Similar background. I started out as a rescue diver with the Shelby County Sheriff's Office.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then, doing body recoveries and, and ran a parallel track as an entrepreneur, always wanting to have my own business in some aspect of rescue. So, it's interesting how those, those two interests interweave.
Yeah. So you know what it's like to dive in a cup of coffee.
Oh yeah.
Where you're down there and it's
you can see nothing.
Now, how did you do your searches? Did you just
rope searches?
Yeah, when you were doing a body recovery, how did you do your search?
Yeah, we would do either a spiral rope search or
so you did. So we did either, if it was out in the middle of the lake, we did then full circle searches, from the boat. If it was from off the shore, it was semicircular patterns that we then, Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. So, and then you do the first pass, you can see the first pass, and after the first pass,
You mucked
It's
it up.
pitch dark.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is. It teaches you how to live in an environment that's completely made within your imagination at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it was very, it was very similar doing diving and doing, recoveries than to go into a fire where you could see absolutely nothing in that scenario also, and have to do everything by feel and your senses, and, not relying on any sight whatsoever.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I then did a lot of well blasting. And it was very, very, where you're lowering explosives down a well to relieve an obstruction or create fissures in the side so that water can percolate through. And it's the same thing. You're lowering this thing into a space that you can't see, and you just have to imagine where it is and what it's doing, and hope that you're in the right spot. It's now we have some better technologies on both fronts, though, thermal imaging cameras and underwater cameras, and we're getting that sense of sight back in a lot of areas where we didn't have it.
Yeah, I know my department back in Greensburg, the dive team there, they have now, the sonar, systems, and so that they're able to basically not, they're able to scan the lake or the river or whatever, and know exactly where the person is, and then two people go in and go down and get the body and bring it back up.
They
Where
take
it
all the
used
fun out of it, huh?
Yeah, I mean, where it used to be, we'd have anywhere between 9 to 12 divers on
Yeah.
a rope, and I'm sure that you probably experienced situations where you're down there, and something happens where the rope then gets entangled in some debris or
Yep.
tree, a snag or something like that, and all of a sudden the rope is coming around, and suddenly you're running right into another group of people,
Right.
other divers, and that we did a recovery one time at Indian Lake, where it was a man-made lake where they cut all they basically cleared it, dredged it all out, and then pushed all the trees and everything into this pile in the bottom of the lake. Well,
Whoa.
it just so happens that where the guy drowned at, we went down to get him, and we got underneath the canopy of where the trees were, and then we got stuck, and then everybody started coming up, and then we ran into the canopy. It was really scary there for a minute.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a perfect entanglement situation there.
Yeah. So, but
And even having done that, right, you're still saying that raising money to start your business is the hardest thing you've done.
yeah,
This is to put it in perspective.
yeah. I mean, like I said, I've started a number of companies, but I usually bankrolled them myself.
Yeah.
But this one here was that, I've learned from other startups that use other people's money, and you just have to, unless you're independently wealthy. But this case here, I mean, we need $3.5 million to really get this product to full commercialization, and then we're going to do a $15 million Series A round. So
let's get through the first round first, right?
Yeah. That's we're doing an investment seminar tomorrow. Like I said, down here at the Fairmont Grand Del Mar, we've got 25 people, high net worth individuals. So I'm hoping that out of that meeting, that seminar, we're going to have a bountiful of revenue coming in.
I hope so. It's a new space, I think, right, for investment. Right. First of all, just the idea of investing in something related to wildfire, was foreign a few years ago. Then the first round of investments came from people who thought that the answer was all in some type of a data or software or sensor environment, because investors really, they had made their money in software, and so from their perspective, software was the answer for everything. And this didn't take into account that fire is a physical reality, unimpacted by data. Right? You can't douse fires with data. So
yeah, I was going to say, you can't
at some
put
point
fire
you
out
have to have a
data.
hardware thing, and one of the things they say in that investment world, I'm sure you've heard, is hardware is hard. And it is because there's a sense that it's not, very scalable. But I think as we see it, like, it's not about scalability. It's about what's the value of that piece of equipment at the time when you need it. And that's where, the value is, right? When entire neighborhoods are being consumed by wildfires, if you've got a piece of hardware that could take a dent out of that fire, then that is worth a tremendous amount. So it's not
Yeah,
about
Steve, I'm
nuts and
thinking more
bolts.
and more. Yeah, I'm thinking more and more, Steve, that we are kindred spirits. That now you're saying that you run dive team also, but the fact that both of us are thinking as suppression as a service,
Yeah,
I think is
SaaS.
really unique. I don't think.
Right, and you can steal that for your investor pitch. You can just say you're a SaaS company,
Yeah,
and then say, except for us, it's suppression is a service.
Suppression as a service. Like you said, when the first time we talked, and it's funny is because I think it was 2 days before that, in a meeting, or in a Monday morning meeting, I said to my team that, once we get this prototype built, once we validate it, I don't care where we got to go, but we're going to go wherever there's fire and anywhere somebody will pay for us to go put fire out.
Yep, whether it's Australia, Canada, Portugal, wherever, right?
Wherever, ever. And I mean, I was just I had a conversation with a gentleman down in Chile, that Argentina, that there's a lot of timber companies down there that they have a forest that starts gets lightning strike or something like that. They have to have their own fire department. There's no government fire department really to put it out. And so I'm talking to this individual, and they were saying, yeah, I mean, he said, with what you're doing, he said, these timber companies would be more than willing to pay to have you come down and put these fires out.
Great. We'll get tickets next to each other.
There you go. There you go.
I fight it from the ground. You fight it from the air. We'll catch it in the middle.
I think
what I'm wondering is, I'd love to see some of these stats on these private firefighter companies to measure the efficiency. If you could, get a comparable fire, and to see what the efficiency difference is between a private company putting it out and the government putting it out. Because the government kind of has a monopoly here in the States, right? They're the only ones who get to put out fires. And so we've not had an opportunity to have a comparison. What happens if we privatize this? What happens if the profit is actually in getting the fire out?
I think we're going to have that opportunity to be able to do that comparison here. I mean, I think between what you're developing and what we're developing, you're hitting it on the ground and we're hitting it from the air. And I could see where, in a scenario where you go in, knock it down, we come in over top of it and then secure it by, just blanketing it with foam. I think our two technologies combined could be a real powerhouse.
Very powerful. Let me ask you, you said that the high expansion foams that you were intending to use were, ecologically safe, environmentally friendly, safe for people, pets, and plants. By what measures are you able to say that? Because there's a divided group of pyrochemistries. All 100% of them say they're safe, and then half of them have testing to support that, and the other half have marketing departments to support that.
Ours is based off of testing, the testing that has been completed on the foam by independent labs, showing that it's well below the thresholds, cutoff levels for certain chemicals and everything else. So it's they're certified environmentally safe products.
While those agencies still exist.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I don't know, I mean, do you have to go through any of the process for the approval process with the federal government?
Not really. Because we're not a chemical manufacturer. So our equipment is chemistry agnostic. You could put freshwater, saltwater, miso soup, retardant, whatever you want to put in there. The jet doesn't know, right? It's just pumping and spraying.
Yeah.
So the onus is really on the chemical manufacturer to have done the testing and to warranty it's safe. But on our side, we would need to see evidence of the testing before we spray it, because once something goes wrong and, downstream, right, everyone's going to get sued, even if you had nothing to do with making the chemical. Right? If you sprayed it, you're going to be named in the suit. We know that. So just to avoid problems, we want to make sure we're not spraying anything that's damaging to the environment.
Yeah, same here. I mean, we know that ultimately when we start, or we're incorporated into the rotation of aircraft and everything else, and let's say we're dropping on a whole entire neighborhood and we're just blanketing everything, trees, homes, all that, and just putting down a barrier, that I'm fully expecting at some point somebody will come back and say, hey, my plants died, or my fish in my pond died, or something. There will be some claims of that. And so, it's just, that's where my risk management background kicks in, my insurance background, where we'll have a GL product policy, we'll have an environmental liability policy. We'll have the coverages in place to be able to take and defend those. Because it's inevitable. I just absolutely see it happening. It's this typical where somebody's driving down the freeway and there's a truck in front of them, and the truck might kick up a stone off of the road, and it hits the windshield and it breaks, and the driver immediately says, well, the truck's responsible. And it's not like the stone fell out of the truck.
Right.
And so, there's no liability there. So you have to be able to prove liability. So I'm pretty good at being able to defend that.
Yeah. You have to prove liability, but the plaintiff has to prove liability. At the same time, you still have to pay your attorneys to defend.
Yeah, that's what, again,
you lose either way if you're named, right?
But something, doing what we're doing,
small price to pay is the way I see it, right?
It's going to be, when you're doing cutting edge technology, there's just, shit's going to happen. I mean, I certainly don't know exactly how this is going to ultimately perform and pay out, and the data that's going to be produced, until we actually go build the full scale unit and go test it and run it. And right. I think you're probably in the same position.
Same boat. Absolutely.
You don't know until you know, and then you know, and then you
adjust.
And then there's going to be, I'm fully expecting that there will be probably a situation where things don't work out as originally planned. We've got to go back and do some additional engineering, and that's happened all along this whole journey that we're on right now. Is that we start out with one thing, and we build it, we test it, and we go, okay, well, that didn't work the way we thought, and we make some changes.
Iterate.
Yeah, and then we come back and we go, okay, that's a lot better now. I mean, if I showed you the videos of the foam unit, the 1/16 scale unit, when we first started, and the volume of foam that we were producing, and the volume of foam that we produce now, I mean, it's probably 10x what the original amount was.
Wow. No, iteration's great. The light that's lighting us right now, is not Edison's light bulb, right? It's derivative of it. And as technologies and circumstances change, we continue to evolve the tech. So, no, it's very interesting. And we're similarly in that spot, where we theoretically think something could work. Maybe there's some math supporting it and some science supporting it, but ultimately you have to build it and you have to test it before you know what it's really going to do.
Yeah, I know from our perspective in our technology. I mean, I've used this technology on multiple fires, structure fires, gasoline fires. It was used, like I said, originally to fight coal mine fires. It was used to put out 300,000 tires that were burning.
Wow.
That was supposed to burn for 30 days. And when the ground unit got on the scene, it traveled literally for 5 hours to get to the fire, got on scene, and within 10 hours, that fire was out. So it has proven itself as a
Yeah.
very, very effective suppressing technology. So I'm confident that it's going to work well in the wildland application. I mean, especially now, we've got the unit performing at a level where we're producing what I relate to as almost shaving cream quality foam. It's a very, very,
Wow.
very tight bubbles, very heavyweight, a lot of water in it. So I think we're going to be able to do a lot of damage with it.
I would say we're building reverse Hanukkah technology. Things that were supposed to burn for 8 days, now we put them out in the first day.
Yeah. Well, that's what
Yeah.
that's what we're saying, is that
Yeah.
instead of putting out fires in weeks and months, we're putting it
Yeah.
out in days and weeks.
Right.
We're
And
shortening that time frame that the fire's burning, which it's there. There's a saying in the fire service: the blacker the forest, the greener the paycheck. So we both are probably looking at some, I don't want to say pushback, but just a reluctancy to adopt technology, just because of the fire service motto of 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress.
yeah, well, maybe it's not a matter of adopt, but implement. Adopt would mean that we make it and then they take it and use it, and they're reluctant to try new stuff. But maybe they don't adopt it, but they deploy it, or they contract us to do
Yeah,
it.
that's why I keep on going back to that suppression as a service. I think that is, I have said I'm not going to allow some bureaucrat to decide whether we succeed or fail. I'm going to take matters into my own hand, and I'm going to go where, like I said, I'm going to go where there's fire, and somebody's willing to pay to put that fire out, and we'll prove the technology and prove the effectiveness, and then I think sooner or later that you bring the other parties into it, even if they're kicking and screaming. I think if both of our technologies prove to be as effective as we believe they will be, it's going to be hard for fire service to not utilize it. I mean, from
Right.
our
There'll be public
perspective,
demand. Yeah.
I mean, we intend to put, have it so that there's political pressure then on elected officials to say, hey, why aren't we using this? Why is this sitting and not being used when the fires are burning? And so, hopefully, though, I got to tell you, though, 30 years in the fire service, I've never seen a more openness to
True.
new technology and doing things differently. And I'm encouraged by that. I've been encouraged by the number of people who have looked at our technology and have come back, and this is fire service people who come back and said, listen, you build the full scale unit, you validate, you prove it works, and man, I'll tell you what, I'm behind.
Yeah. Right. I mean, when you said you're looking for the first person who'll both have a fire and pay you to come for it, we dial that back and we say, look, we're just looking for the first person who will let us use this on a fire, paid or not, because once it proves the value, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I agree with you on that. I mean, in the early days, when we have to go prove it, and that in itself is a challenge, because getting the fire service to even incorporate it into an actual fire, unless it has been pre-tested, they've trained with it, they're comfortable with it, they understand it, you've had, classes on it. I mean, and I'm sure you going to have the same challenges that we're going to have, but I have to teach both the fire service and the aviation industry about our technology. And so, there's a learning curve there that has to be as part of the adoption curve.
Yeah, and your tech might also work ground-based. That if you have winds distributing it, you could put this on a flatbed truck and just start making foam, and the wind would start stacking the foam up against the leading edge of buildings. It would, right, because the foam's going to accumulate on the weather side buildings, which is where the ember cast is going to hit.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it could work really well for that too.
Well, that's how I started this process originally. This project I started, it was based on doing a ground-based unit, and I started the whole concept of this in 2003, and there's just something about it that wasn't feeling right, and I put it on the shelf, and it wasn't until then 2018 when the Paradise Fire happened.
Yeah.
And we lost Paradise, and and there's 22,000 structures, and 85 people got killed. It was like something's got to happen here, and I had a number of people that I had worked with back in 2003 came out and said, whatever happened to what you were working on, and we need something like that. And so I pulled it off the shelf and started working on it again, and it was one night about midnight after a couple of adult beverages and a few other things that I looking at it and thought, because I'm a former fixed wing and helo pilot, and I looked at it and said, if this thing could fly, it would eliminate all the the obstacles of use and everything else. And that's when I started doing design work for being an aerial device. So the plan here is that we will roll this out as an external load system hanging from a helicopter. And then once we get the FAA STC approvals to attach it to the helicopter, and then it will get fixed to the actual aircraft that it's designed for.
Okay. So let me ask you something, because when I looked at your system, I thought this makes a lot of sense, right? Foam is a proven technology. Aviation is an existing thing. You combine those things, it makes sense. Then we looked at what happened in LA, where they had tied up $72 million, in aerial firefighting assets that were all grounded because they had a wind-based fire, wind-driven fire, where the winds exceeded the 35 knots and they had to ground everything. So my question is, where did this 35 knot rule come from? Because when the military has a target, they've got to go knock out some bad guys somewhere. They're not asking, well, are the winds on the ground 35 knots? Like that doesn't even come into play. So where did we get the idea that, aerial firefighting could only be done up to 35 knots, but military strikes could be done, in any weather, day or night, regardless of wind speeds?
I've asked that same question.
Okay. What'd you find out?
Well, it's like, remember back in COVID, they said you got to stand, 6 feet apart.
Right. Where'd that come from?
Well, somebody pulled it out of their ass. That's where it came from. So,
that's right.
How we picked 35 knots that you had a ground aircraft, in talking with pilots who like Sky-Crane pilots and everything else, they've said that you can have sustained winds, below 30 knots. You're flying, but you can get gusts of 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, and you're just getting thrown all over the place up there. So I think when you're flying, I think maybe what the difference between a military, tactical operation where you may be dropping from, munitions from, a couple thousand feet, or even if you're a helicopter, you're several hundred feet off the ground, where when you're doing, a tanker drop or even a water drop with a helicopter, you're 100 foot, 150 foot off deck, so that you get a downwind. I mean, you can slam that aircraft into the ground. So that, that's from a pilot perspective, I look at it and go, okay, that makes sense. That, you just have, when you have that kind of wind and you are that close to the ground, you got to be prudent.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll be using less and less manned aircraft.
Well, I think that's probably, I'm sure you're familiar with rain.
Yes.
and what they're doing. I mean, so they've got an autonomous Black Hawk helicopter that they built. Soon as we have this prototype built, we've had multiple conversations with people at Rain, but I think our technology combined with what they're doing on the autonomous flight, I think it makes a lot of sense to pair those two together also. And that, ultimately, having somebody, a crew on board. I mean, we lose pilots almost every year. Every single year,
Every
there's
year.
fatalities for in aircraft mishaps. Whether whether there is a mechanical failure on the ship. I mean, we've had it where some of the old tankers, the wings have literally fallen off the aircraft and killed the pilots. We've had it where, just recently, last year or so, where you had two helicopters collide out in Riverside, and, 3 people died out of that. So, I mean, it's a dangerous job. And so I think ultimately moving to an autonomous flight, and people talk about, well, then the helicopter is going to be able to get closer to the fire, inside the fire and everything else. And my response has always been, helicopters don't like a lot of particulate going into the turbines.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know how that's going to work, but I think we're in an era of just tremendous potential in front of us, new innovations, and certainly you and I think, are leading some of that way, especially on the fire suppressing side of technology. I mean, I think you said it best, that you can detect it, you can get something there, but you still ultimately have to put the fire out. And detecting it maybe earlier, getting crews, but if it's out in the middle of nowhere and you detect it, and you still have a long travel time to get there.
That 2 minutes isn't going to matter, right?
Yeah. So it's, especially if it's detected and it's wind driven. I mean, you can have it detected immediately, but it's still going to blow up on you, because it just can't be contained.
Right. Very interesting. Well, whether it's your tech, my tech, or neither of our techs, I think that what's important is that people start to get into hardware, and that the VC community start funding hardware, because it might take the development from scratch, like you and I have done, of 30 and 40 companies before we get the right combination of techs.
Yeah.
We've both taken our best guess at what we think that the form of that should be. But the more people who jump into the hardware space, the more likely we are to have the tools that we need for direct suppression. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Did you bootstrap yours originally?
Originally,
Yeah.
up to the leaf blower stage, and then Tim Draper funded us to, gave us our seed money to get to the next serious stage where we're using jet engines. And then Cottonwood Technology and Muse Climate Capital came in, and they pushed up the rest of the budget so that we could get full scale 5,000-pound thrust jet engine mounted on a big military truck. So,
and who was the guy who gave you your original seed?
Tim Draper.
Tim Draper.
Yeah, and what I'd like to see is folks like Convective Capital and Tim Draper come together and form a wildfire hardware fund specifically for breeding this new tech.
It's interesting. I cannot get Convective Capital to look at us.
Well,
I don't know. It's
they've started to move finally into hardware now with BurnBot. So, maybe it's time that they start funding that.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's been frustrating in getting to. I bootstrapped the first couple $100,000 of this project. It was my money that got us to the 1/16 scale prototype and test. And then once I was able to do proof of concept and had an MVP, that it was like, okay, now it's time to go get investors.
Right. Well, that's good. The more hurdles you cross on your own, the more likely they are to come in behind you. Larry, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Listen, Steve, I appreciate you having me, and looking forward to working with you out there on the on an incident and
Me too.
putting fire out. I mean,
Me
it's only a matter of time that our paths are going to be crossing out on in the
Many
real
times.
world.
Many times. Larry Sukay with Western States Fire, a recent entry into the hardware battle against wildfire. Much welcomed, much needed, and look forward to working with you, Larry. Folks, you've been watching and listening to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. Till I see you next, be careful. Don't play with matches.